It's already February, and while most people's goals and motivations have already fallen by the wayside, you are going to keep your motivation and discipline throughout all of 2025. I'm going to show you 6 science-based strategies and actionable steps that you can take to ensure you hit your goals for 2025. I know a little something about this as a licensed clinical psychologist and behavioral scientist who has focused on performance optimization for the last 10 years. This is going to be a pretty in-depth video, so I have my tea here, I have my notes, something to write with, and if you need it, the chapters are down below. All right, let's start at the beginning. In order to maintain your motivation and ensure that you're disciplined throughout the 12-month period, it's important that you focus on goal selection. Here's a newsflash: we have a limited amount of time, energy, and resources. We cannot focus on all things, be all things to all people. We need to focus on 2 or 3 overarching goals that are going to get us through the year. That doesn't mean that you're only going to do 2 things throughout the whole 365 days. It simply means that we can only pick 2 or 3 really big things to get after over that time period. We might still have little side quests or little mini goals that we're trying to get through during the year, but a year is just enough to get after 2 or 3 big rocks or big goals. It might be hard for you to narrow your goals down to the 2 or 3 that you want to get after this year. If you're having some trouble narrowing down your goals, the easiest way to stay motivated with a goal is to identify a goal that's consistent with one of your top values. When you select goals that are consistent with your values, it is way easier to maintain motivation because things that are important to us provide a sense of intrinsic motivation. That means that you feel like doing it just because it feels good or it comes from within you, and you don't really need to artificially create motivation or have external motivators to keep you going on the journey. If you don't know what your values are, I have an entire video library that can help you identify your values, but here are the cliff notes. You can start with 2 pieces of paper. You can Google values list, and if you want some of my recommended favorites, including my own step-by-step guide for how to identify your values, I'll leave that in the description box down below. Gather up this list of common values and identify the top 4 or 5 that resonate with you. If you want to get a little deeper than that, you can also identify the moments where you were the most proud of yourself, and you can try to figure out what is important to you and what was relevant to you about those experiences, and it might give you a little insight on what you value the most. Once you've identified your values, you can look at your list of potential goals and identify which goals are most consistent with your value system. The next way to ensure that you maintain motivation as you go through the year is to refine your goals and be really specific. According to Google, these are the top goals. What does be financially secure really mean? What does eat healthier mean? What does reduce social media use mean? A lot of my clients tell me that their yearly goal is to be more financially stable. In order to further refine that goal, ask yourself a series of what questions. This is slightly different than root cause analysis, where you're asking yourself the 5 whys. These are more what focused questions so that you can really hone in on what is it that you're trying to do here. So when I ask, what do you mean by being more financially secure? Sometimes I get a response like, I don't want to think about money. And then I ask, you never want to think about money? Again, like you never want to look at your bank account? Help me understand. If they tell me something like, I want to feel more secure, or I want to feel like we have enough, then I know that that goal is really about an internal feeling, and there's no numeric that I can attach to that to change their feelings. I can recommend that they seek therapy so that they can understand their emotional relationship with money and how they got to this place. But if I try to get them toward their goal by identifying a specific numeric target and working toward that target, the number is not going to necessarily change their feeling. Now, if they answer, I want to know that I'm saving enough for retirement, or I want to go to 7-Eleven and not worry about whether or not there's enough money in my bank account for a Slurpee, These are some specific, measurable goals that I can get after. You may have heard about setting SMART goals and why that's generally important for goal attainment. Well, if you're following along on the process so far, you've already hit the S because we have a specific goal after we've drilled down and refined the goal. We have a goal that's measurable because we've been able to specifically identify what it is that you actually want. And we've already hit the R because this goal should be relevant to you since it's important to your value system. In order to set the systems in place to ensure motivation and discipline throughout the year, we need to differentiate between achievement goals and process goals. Achievement goals have a specific end result in mind. Because there's a specific end state, it's easy to identify whether or not you've accomplished or not accomplished that specific goal. Examples of achievement goals are I will lift 200 pounds for my 1 rep max deadlift. I will earn a PhD. I will gain 100,000 followers. On the other hand, process goals focus on actions, strategies, and habits, and the goal is to maintain consistency on those things over time. Many of us will have a mix of achievement goals and process goals. It's important to identify which goals because we're going to have different strategies and how to maintain motivation for each of those types of goals. The third way to ensure continual process and motivation across the year is to have a bias toward action. Most people think that motivation precedes behavior, but the psychological literature actually supports the opposite. We do need some motivation to actually get started, but once you get started, behavior becomes reinforcing, and that starts a feedback loop that continues the motivation for action. A fancy way of saying that once we start doing things, we get a little jolt of feel-good juices, and we also start to prove to ourselves that we can actually do it. We start to become the person that takes that first step. And those things improve self-efficacy, which is your belief that you can actually do something. And when we think we could do something, it actually becomes easier for us to start doing that thing more. When you have some evidence that you're a good public speaker, you're more likely to seek out additional public speaking opportunities. And because of that, you actually start building mastery and competency in public speaking, which makes you better at public speaking and more comfortable at public speaking. So once you start taking some action toward that goal, it starts the momentum that you need to maintain that motivation. This is actually a technique that we use in a type of therapy called behavioral activation therapy, and it's a type of therapy that helps individual managing feelings of depression. Sometimes when you're down, you feel like you don't have any motivation to actually engage in any activities, and that actually has the opposite loop. So when you don't engage in activities, you don't get the pleasure and satisfaction that you get from those activities. So you just get more sad. So part of behavioral activation is actually just acting in spite of your motivation. So even if you don't feel like it, you're going to go out there and take a walk, or you're going to go out to that coffee shop. There are also strategies in therapies for anxiety, specifically social anxiety, where there's a general hierarchy of things that you are avoiding, and avoidance sustains avoidance. So we work with individuals to get out there and start engaging in social situations, which increases the likelihood that you're going to have a positive social interaction, which then increases the likelihood that you'll want to do more and more social interacting. If you're interested in these types of science and therapeutic strategies for designing a productive life while maintaining your mental health, consider subscribing to this channel. It's okay, I'll wait. I need a little bit of tea. I hope it's clear that having a bias toward action isn't just like willy-nilly doing all the things. It's about engaging in the right type of action. So this is the time to develop a system that will ensure success. That's right, I said ensure success. When you're dealing with goals that have a specific outcome, there are likely experts that have carved out the way forward and the path that you can take to achieve that goal somewhere. If it's something as common as wanting to increase your strength, there are plenty of expert strength training programs out there that'll walk you through the step-by-step process to get you to that 200-pound deadlift. If you want to get a PhD, there is a standard process to get you through that. It generally starts with obtaining an undergraduate degree. Sometimes it involves getting a master's degree before your PhD. Sometimes you can directly apply to get that PhD, but there is a process. Understanding what the process and steps are toward that specific goal helps us to turn the achievement goal into a process goal. Ultimately, we want all of our goals to become process goals, even the achievement ones. Process goals ensures that we have a specific plan of action that we can follow to continuously move toward our goal. Remember a few minutes ago when I explained that we need to start gathering up small evidence of success in order to maintain motivation over time? Well, understanding the step-by-step process helps us understand what we need to do first, next, and last in order to get toward that goal. Along the way, we're gathering up evidence of success, which helps us maintain motivation over time. Process goals are also more likely to help us develop the discipline needed for long-term goal attainment. That's because processes involve doing things over and over or doing things in a specific order, and that helps us flex our discipline muscle over time. Discipline is a key part of sustained motivation, but not in the way that you might think. In fact, we don't really need to have sustained discipline. We only need enough discipline to internalize a process so that it becomes a habit, and it takes less and less discipline for us to engage in that process. Over time, it just becomes part of what we do and who we are. So you need discipline for a short period of time to push you to do something at first, but don't worry, you're not going to need to sustain it for the next 12 months. All right, I didn't forget about this goal of 100,000 followers. As far as I know, there's no guaranteed route to 100,000 followers. If you do know, leave it in the description box down below. Wouldn't it be funny if this entire video was just so that I could get the secret to getting 100,000 followers? If you're unable to find a system that will ensure your success, it's likely that your goal is something beyond your control. It's important to understand the role of luck and the role of environment and other things that are outside of your control in some goal attainment. This doesn't mean that you abandon your goal of YouTube stardom. It simply means that you modify your goals to focus on processes that are within your control. For example, there's no guaranteed route to 100,000 followers, but there is some evidence to suggest that consistent weekly posting on platforms such as YouTube increase the likelihood that you'll have sustained growth in terms of subscribers over time. So although the goal of having 100,000 subscribers might better fall into the category of a dream, the goal of continuously growing your YouTube channel or posting on a weekly basis, these are things that are within your control, are a reasonable target because you won't be disappointed by focusing your time and effort on things that you can't really have an impact on. Let's touch on one final point about maintaining motivation and the relationship that that has with understanding the process toward your goals. Sometimes people don't have a full understanding of what it takes to get to a specific goal. Like you might want to have a 200-pound deadlift, but you don't really like to go to the gym at all, when you started understanding that the process that ensures that success involves regular weightlifting sessions, you just kind of change your mind. That's okay. Maybe that's not one of your 2 or 3 goals that you're going to try to get after this year. For the rest of us, knowing that process is going to help you set your expectations. And one of the definitions of happiness in the psychology literature is when reality meets your expectations. So if you have an expectation that something is going to be easy or hard, and then the reality matches that expectation, you're more likely to be happy in the process. The happier you are in the process, the more neurochemical reinforcement you're going to get, increasing the likelihood that you'll continue to engage in that behavior, also known as sustained motivation. After going through that process, we've now also hit the A in SMART goals because we know that this goal is attainable since we understand the actual process that's needed to attain those goals. Am I even a psychologist if I don't talk about mindset and the role of mindset in sustained motivation? I'm working on a video on the hardest mindsets to master, and there's a few mindsets that are really helpful in sustaining motivation over time. The first one we've already discussed, and that's understanding what's within your control and what's not in your control. We are understanding the balance between how our inputs affect that likelihood while also maintaining a bit of deference and understanding that although we might never get to that gold star, we focus our time, energy, and attention on the things that we can control rather than spending all of our time spinning our wheels on things that we can't control, and that includes whether or not we ever get to that outcome. The next mindset is feeling like everything is figure-outable. I wish that I could take credit for coming up with that term, but it's actually based on this book right here. I've never read the book, but I just love the concept of things being figure-outable. And we have done a little bit of figuring things out in this video. We identified specific paths to ensure success. We've even talked about doing a little research to try to understand what it takes to get to your goal. And that mindset is really what Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. And this feeling like our specific skills, talents, even intelligence are not a fixed state, but rather something that we can impact and something that we can grow, expand, and evolve over time. And if you have that feeling like things are figure-outable, you're more likely to stick to processes when the going gets tough. A lot of people lose motivation, discipline, and drive because they hit a rough spot. But if you're moving through the world assuming that you can figure things out, it's gonna help you maintain that motivation. That links nicely into this third mindset, which is understanding that mistakes are part of the process. I'm really digging this concept of soft discipline these days, which is a way to kind of give yourself grace and continue moving through things even when you're not perfect. Just like putting behavior before motivation, there are multiple types of therapeutic interventions that focus on mistakes just being part of the process, like relapse prevention programs or harm reduction models, where we expect individuals, even individuals that are engaging in potentially maladaptive behaviors, that every now and then they will make a mistake. Every now and then they will have a relapse. Every now and then we might not move forward in the process. And that's okay. It's just part of the human experience. Because we know that setbacks are part of the process and we expect setbacks over the course of a year, we're going to do 2 things to ensure that we're sustaining motivation. First, we're going to make it as easy as possible to engage in every part of the process. This is a concept highlighted in the book Atomic Habits, where James Clear explores the role of making things easy in habit development and habit sustainment. Making the process easy also involves expecting that things will go wrong from time to time. So you don't only want to make it easy to move forward in the process, you also want to make it easy to jump back into the process when stumbles inevitably happen. Before we go on to the next science-based strategy to maintain your motivation and discipline, I would love to know if you learned one thing from this video. Let me know by hitting that like button, and if you learned 2 things from this video, consider subscribing to this channel. Alright, this is the part I struggle with. Trust the process. When we were taking the time to look through and determine the actual path that's going to ensure success, you likely ran into a few options that you could choose from. Ultimately, you chose to go with one specific process. Some people, often known as maximizers, really get stuck in the weeds and second guess whether or not they chose the right path to success. It's important for you to trust the you who made the plan. You made the selection. You weeded through the processes and ultimately made a selection that you decided would ensure your success. Trust yourself. It may be a waste of time and 3 steps back to reanalyze whether or not your overall process was the wrong one. It's important for you to stick with your originally identified process for long enough to collect some wins, to collect some gains, and that success will start to motivate you and propel you forward. Now, that doesn't mean that you'll never evaluate the process. The 6th way to continuously maintain motivation and movement toward your goal is to have a balance between trusting and sticking with your process and also continuously evaluating your process. I cannot overemphasize the role of tracking your progress. In the business world, it's sometimes said that what is measured gets improved, and it's also true for our behavior. In the psychology world, there's a concept called behavioral monitoring, and it has this sort of magic to it. I say that it's a sort of magic because it works for both behaviors that you're trying to increase and behaviors that you're trying to decrease. Merely monitoring behavior that you want to increase increases the likelihood that you'll engage in that behavior. And just tracking a behavior that you're trying to stop decreases the likelihood that you'll engage in that behavior. We're not just tracking for tracking's sake, even though I love me a good tracker. This continual monitoring allows you to make micro adjustments as you're moving toward your goal. It also allows you to collect enough data so that you can understand whether or not you've chosen the wrong process completely. See, having that data changes your decision to abandon ship from an emotion to a more logical, data-driven decision. It's important that you integrate this type of reflection and tracking into your normal planning processes, which is why next week's video focuses on my personal reflection cycles, which include how I track my goals on a yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, and even daily basis. That will be linked here when it's out, and in the meantime, check out this video that YouTube thinks you'll like.